Today, we aren't just talking about a book. We are stepping into a nightmare that feels more real than the world outside your window. Imagine this. You wake up on a normal Tuesday. You're hungry, you're waiting for your breakfast, but instead of the lady who brings your food, two strangers are standing in your room. They don't have a warrant, they don't have a uniform, but they tell you one thing that changes your life forever. You are under arrest. You ask why? They don't know. You ask who accused you? They won't say. This is how Franz Kafka begins his masterpiece, The Trial. And if you think this is just an old story from 1914, you're wrong. So grab your coffee, dim the lights, and let's get into the mind of Kafka. It appeared that someone had been spreading falsehoods about Joseph K. For despite his certain innocence, he was taken into custody one morning. Typically, his breakfast was served at 8 o'clock by the cook of his landlady, Mrs. Grubach. But on this occasion, she did not appear. Such a thing had never happened before. Kay lingered for a moment, watching the elderly woman who lived across the street from his pillow. She was peering at him with a degree of nosiness that was quite out of character for her. Eventually, feeling both hungry and troubled, he rang the bell. Hey guys, if you're liking the story so far, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It's the best way to support the channel and make sure you don't miss the next part of this deep dive. Now, back to the video.
A knock followed immediately, and a man Kay had never seen in the building before stepped inside. He was thin but solidly built, dressed in a tight-fitting black outfit featuring numerous folds, pockets, buckles, and buttons, along with a belt. The clothing seemed highly functional, though it wasn't at all clear what its actual purpose was. "Who are you?" Kay demanded, propping himself up in bed. The man, however, brushed off the question, as if his presence was an established fact that required no explanation, merely asking, "You rang?"
"Anna was supposed to have brought me my meal," Kay said. He tried to decipher the man's identity through silent observation and reflection, but the stranger didn't stay still long enough to be scrutinized. Instead, he went to the door, opened it slightly, and told someone standing just on the other side, he is asking for Anna to bring his breakfast. A muffled laugh came from the next room. From the sound, it was difficult to tell if it was one person or a group. The stranger couldn't have learned anything he didn't already know from the laughter. Yet he turned back to Kay and reported, "It is not possible."
"That would be a first," Kay replied, leaping out of bed to quickly tug on his trousers. "I intend to see who is in the next room and why Mrs. Grubach has allowed my privacy to be invaded this way." It struck him immediately that he shouldn't have voiced these thoughts, as doing so seemed to grant them a certain level of recognition and power, but he didn't care much at that moment. The stranger, however, seemed to view it that way, asking, "Don't you think it would be better if you stayed put?" "I have no intention of staying here, nor will I speak to you further until you've introduced yourself," Kay said. "I only mentioned it for your own sake," the stranger replied, opening the door without being asked to do so. Kay entered the adjoining room more slowly than he had intended. At a glance, it looked exactly as it had the night before. It was Mrs. Grubach's sitting room, packed to the walls with furniture, cloths, porcelain, and photographs. There might have been a bit more open space than usual today, though it wasn't obvious. The primary change was a man sitting by the open window holding a book, from which he now glanced up. "You should have remained in your quarters. Didn't Franz tell you?" the man said. "And just what is it you want?" Kay asked, looking back and forth between this new individual and the one identified as Franz, who remained at the doorway. Through the open window, he spotted the old woman again, who had moved closer to her own window to ensure she didn't miss anything. Her intense curiosity made her look almost senile. "I want to speak with Mrs. Grubach," Kay said.
making a gesture as if he were breaking away from the two men, even though they weren't touching him, and preparing to leave. "No," said the man at the window, tossing his book onto a coffee table and standing up. "You cannot leave while you are under arrest."
"So it seems," Kay remarked. "And why am I being arrested?" "We aren't permitted to tell you that," the man replied. "Go back to your room and wait." "Legal actions have already begun," the man stated, "and you will be informed of all the particulars when the time is right. It isn't actually my responsibility to be this cordial with you, but I trust no one but Franz will find out, and he has already been far more amicable toward you than the regulations allow. If your luck with arresting officers continues at this rate, you can expect your situation to resolve favorably."
Kay felt the urge to sit down, but he quickly realized that, aside from the chair positioned by the window, the room offered nowhere else to rest. "You will soon see for yourself how accurate all of this is," Franz added. Both men then moved toward Kay. They were notably larger than he was, particularly the second individual, who repeatedly patted Kay on the shoulder. The pair began feeling the fabric of Kay's nightshirt, remarking that he would soon be forced to wear one of much poorer quality. However, they offered to keep his current nightshirt and his other undergarments in their possession, promising to return them if his legal matter ended well. "It is in your best interest to hand these items over to us, rather than leaving them in the government storeroom," they advised. "Things have a habit of vanishing from the storeroom, and after a certain period, they auction items off, regardless of whether the case has actually concluded. Furthermore, cases like this can drag on for a long time, especially the ones we've seen lately. While they would eventually give you the proceeds from the sale, the amount would be trivial. It's not the official sale price that matters, but rather the bribes paid under the table. Besides, such items lose their worth anyway, as they are passed from one person to another over the years." Kay paid very little attention to their explanation. He didn't particularly care about his remaining possessions or who had authority over them. His priority was gaining a clear grasp of his circumstances, but he found it impossible to think straight while these men were present. The second officer's stomach, and Kay was certain they must be policemen, looked almost friendly as it protruded toward him. Yet when Kay glanced up at the man's gaunt, skeletal face, the two features seemed completely mismatched. The man's prominent, crooked nose turned to the side, as if he were snubbing Kay and sharing a silent understanding with his partner.
What sort of people were these? What was their topic of conversation, and what department did they represent? Kay lived in a free country, after all. There was peace everywhere, and the laws were just and strictly followed. Who would dare to accost him in his own residence? He was usually someone who preferred to take life as it came, crossing bridges only when he reached them, and ignoring the future even when danger seemed imminent. But in this instance, that approach felt incorrect.
He considered that the whole thing might be a joke, a massive prank organized by his bank colleagues for some reason, perhaps because today was his 30th birthday. It was certainly a possibility. Maybe all he had to do was laugh in their faces, and they would join in. They might even just be local tradesmen from the corner. They had that look about them. Nevertheless, from the moment he first laid eyes on Franz, Kay had been determined not to surrender even the smallest advantage to these people. There was a minor risk that people might later claim he couldn't take a joke, but despite his usual habit of failing to learn from the past, he recalled a few minor instances where, unlike his more guarded friends, he had acted recklessly without considering the consequences and had been forced to pay for it. He was determined not to let that happen again, at least not today. If they were putting on a performance, he would play his role right along with them.
There was still a moment to act. "Excuse me," Kay said, as he moved quickly between the two officers and back into his own room. Behind him, he heard one of them remark,
He seems rational enough. Once inside, he yanked open his desk drawer. Though everything was arranged perfectly, his frantic state made it impossible to immediately locate the identification he was after. He first grabbed his bicycle permit, but then, thinking it too insignificant for the situation, he kept searching until he found his birth certificate. As he returned to the living room, the door on the far side opened, and Mrs. Gruback started to walk in. He saw her for only a split second. The moment she spotted Kay, she was visibly mortified. She stammered an apology and vanished, pulling the door shut with extreme care. Kay almost called out for her to come in, but instead, he stood frozen in the center of the room, clutching his papers and staring at the door that remained closed.
He stayed that way until he was jerked out of his daze by a shout from the officer sitting at the small table. The man was positioned by the window and, as Kay now noticed, was busy eating Kay's breakfast. "Why didn't she come in?" Kay demanded. "She isn't allowed to," the large policeman replied. "You are under arrest, are you not?" "But how can I be under arrest, and how can it possibly happen like this?" "Here you go again," the officer sighed, dipping a crust of buttered bread into the jar of honey. "We don't provide answers to those kinds of questions." "You will have to answer them," Kay insisted. "Here are my identity documents. Now show me yours, and I demand to see the arrest warrant." "Good heavens!" the policeman exclaimed. "In a situation like yours, you think you can just start barking orders? It won't do you any favors to provoke us, even if you think it might. We are likely more on your side than anyone else you know." "It's the truth. You'd be wise to believe it," Franz added. He held a cup of coffee, but didn't drink, instead fixing Kay with a look that seemed intended to be profound, but was actually impossible to interpret. Kay found himself caught in a silent, unintentional exchange with Franz before he finally slammed his hand down on his documents. "These are my papers," he declared.
"And what are we supposed to do about that?" the large officer shouted back. "You're behaving worse than a child. What do you want? Do you think you'll settle this massive damn trial of yours any faster by arguing with us about IDs and warrants? We're just guards, that's all. Low-level officers like us wouldn't know the first thing about an ID card. Our only job is to watch you for 10 hours a day and get paid for it. That is the extent of our roles." He paused before continuing. "However, what we can do is ensure that the high-ranking officials we report to understand exactly who it is they are arresting and the reasons for it before the warrant is even issued. There are no mistakes in this process. Our authorities, as far as I am aware, and I only know the bottom tiers, don't go out into the public searching for guilt. It is the guilt that pulls the law toward it, just as the statutes say, and then they must send us out. That is the law. Where is the room for error there?" "I am not familiar with this law," Kay said. "Then that is all the worse for you," the policeman replied. "It likely exists only in your own imaginations," Kay countered. He was trying to find a way to get inside their heads, to manipulate their logic to his advantage, or at least find some common ground. But the officer simply brushed him off, saying, "You'll find out soon enough when it starts affecting you." Franz chimed in. "Do you see this, Willem? He admits he's ignorant of the law, while simultaneously claiming he's innocent." "You're absolutely right, but you can't make him understand a thing," the other agreed. Kay stopped talking to them. Do I really have to keep tangling myself up in the nonsense of these low-level bureaucrats? He wondered. They had admitted themselves that they were at the bottom of the hierarchy. They were prattling on about matters of which they didn't have even the slightest understanding. In any case, it was only their sheer ignorance that allowed them to be so self-assured.
Kay felt that a brief conversation with someone of his own social status would make everything infinitely more transparent, far more than any long-winded talk with these two could ever achieve. He paced the limited floor space of the room. Across the street, he noticed the elderly woman had dragged a man, even older than herself, to the window and was now clutching him in her arms. Deciding to put an end to this spectacle, Kay demanded, "Take me to your superior."
Kay stood motionless for some time, offering no response to the proposal. He contemplated whether, if he simply flung open the door to the next room, or even the front exit, the pair would actually dare to block his path. Perhaps that would be the most direct way to settle the matter, by forcing a confrontation. Yet, the thought of them seizing him and pinning him to the floor made him hesitate. He didn't want to forfeit the peculiar advantage he still held over them. Consequently, he chose the more certain path, the one that followed the natural progression of things, and retreated to his room without another word being exchanged. He collapsed onto his bed and reached for a fine apple he had placed on the vanity the night before. This would now serve as his entire breakfast, and as he took a substantial first bite, he realized it was far superior to anything the policeman would have brought him from that grimy cafe. He felt composed and self-assured. Though he had failed to show up at the bank this morning, his relatively high rank meant his absence could be easily excused. He debated whether to send in a formal explanation. He suspected people might be skeptical, but if necessary, he could call upon Mrs. Grubach or the elderly pair across the way, who were likely still hovering by their window, as witnesses.
It struck Kay as strange, at least from the perspective of the guards, that they had ordered him into his room and left him there unattended, where he had numerous means of taking his own life. However, looking at it from his own perspective, what reason would he have to do so? Because those two were sitting in the next room and had eaten his breakfast? It would have been so devoid of meaning that the sheer pointlessness of it would have prevented him from following through, even if he had the urge. Perhaps, if the policemen weren't so clearly intellectually stunted, one might assume they had reached the same conclusion and felt there was no risk in leaving him alone. They were welcome to watch now, if they liked, as he approached the wall cupboard where he stored a bottle of high-quality schnapps. He poured a glass and drank it in place of his breakfast, followed by a second to bolster his courage, and a third as a mere safeguard against any unlikely needs that might arise.
A sudden shout from the adjoining room gave Kay such a jolt that his teeth clattered against the rim of his glass. "The supervisor is ready for you," a voice announced. It was the sheer volume and the sharp military tone of the command that stunned him, a harshness he hadn't expected from the officer named Franz. Despite the shock, he found the order quite welcome. "Finally!" he shouted back, locking his cupboard and rushing into the next room without a moment's delay. The two policemen were waiting there, but they immediately herded him back into his bedroom, as if his attempt to leave was a breach of protocol. "What do you think you're doing?" they demanded. "Do you honestly intend to stand before the supervisor in nothing but your shirt? He'd see to it that you were given a sound thrashing, and we'd likely get the same." "Let go of me, for heaven's sake," Kay cried out, having already been shoved back against his wardrobe. "If you jump me while I'm still in bed, you can hardly expect to find me in formal evening wear."
This outburst caused the policeman to grow very quiet, almost somber, which had the effect of confusing Kay and making him regain his composure. "Pointless formalities," he muttered, grabbing a coat from the chair. He held it up in both hands for a few moments, as if offering it for their professional review. They both shook their heads. "It has to be a black coat," they informed him. At that, Kay flung the garment to the floor.
"Well, it isn't as if this is the actual trial, is it?" he said, though he wasn't entirely sure what he meant by the remark. The officers laughed at this, yet they remained firm. It must be a black coat. "Fine by me if it gets this over with any faster," Kay relented. He opened the wardrobe himself and spent a significant amount of time sorting through his attire. He eventually selected his finest black suit, one featuring a short jacket that had always raised eyebrows among his acquaintances. He also pulled out a clean shirt and began the careful process of dressing. He noted privately that he had managed to accelerate the proceedings by letting the officers forget to make him take a bath. He kept an eye on them to see if the realization would strike, but it never did. Though Willem was careful to send Franz to inform the supervisor that Kay was currently getting dressed.
Once fully dressed, Kay walked past Willem, through the first room and into the one beyond, the door of which stood wide open. Kay was well aware that this room had recently been rented to a typist named Miss Burstner. She usually left for work very early and returned quite late. Kay had never spoken more than a few passing greetings to her. Now, her bedside table had been dragged into the center of the room to serve as a makeshift desk, behind which the supervisor sat. He was lounging with his legs crossed, one arm draped casually over the back of his chair. In the corner of the apartment, 3 young men were occupied with Miss Burstner's photographs, which were displayed in a fabric holder on the wall. A white blouse was draped over the handle of the open window. Across the street, the elderly couple had reappeared at their window, though their group had grown. Standing behind them, towering over the pair, was a man in an unbuttoned shirt that revealed his chest. He was idly twisting and tugging at a reddish goatee with his fingers. "Yosef Ka?" the supervisor inquired, perhaps simply to draw Kay's gaze as he scanned the room. Kay nodded in affirmation. "I imagine all of this morning's events have come as quite a shock to you," the supervisor remarked. As he spoke, he used both hands to clear the small nightstand, pushing aside a candle, a box of matches, a book, and a pincushion, arranging them as though they were essential tools for his task. "Certainly," Kay replied. He began to feel a sense of relief. Finally, he was dealing with someone who seemed to possess some authority and reason, someone he could actually discuss his predicament with. "Naturally, I am surprised, but I wouldn't say I am completely taken aback." "You aren't particularly surprised?" the supervisor asked, carefully placing the candle in the center of the table and grouping the other items around it. "Perhaps you misunderstand my meaning," Kay added quickly. "What I mean is..." He paused, looking around for a place to rest. "I may sit down, I assume?" "That isn't standard procedure," the supervisor countered. "On the other hand," Kay pursued, glancing around the room and hoping to catch the attention of the 3 men distracted by the photographs, "this really cannot be of great significance. I say this because while I have apparently been charged, I cannot think of a single crime I might have committed. But even that is secondary. The real question is, who is behind this indictment? Which government office is handling this? Are you even officials? None of you are in uniform. Unless that," he said, gesturing toward Franz, "is supposed to be one. It looks more like a suit for traveling. I want a straight answer to these points, and I'm certain that once the air is cleared, we can part ways on friendly terms." The supervisor slammed the matchbox down onto the table. "You are making a significant error," he stated firmly. "These gentlemen and I have absolutely nothing to do with the specifics of your case. In fact, we know next to nothing about you. We could be wearing the most formal and precise uniforms imaginable, and it wouldn't make your situation any worse than it already is. As for whether there is a formal charge against you, I cannot give you a definitive answer. I don't even know if there is one. You are under arrest. You were right about that. But that is the extent of my knowledge." He leaned forward slightly. "If these officers have been chatting with you, it was nothing more than idle talk. I cannot answer your questions, but I can offer some advice. Spend less time worrying about us and what is going to happen, and spend more time reflecting on yourself. And stop making such a scene about your innocence. You don't actually make a bad impression, but you are ruining it with all this protesting. Furthermore, you should talk less. Almost everything you've said so far could have been gathered from your behavior, even if you hadn't spoken at all. And frankly, what you have said hasn't exactly done you any favors. Kay fixed his gaze on the supervisor. He couldn't believe this man was speaking to him like a condescending schoolmaster. Was he really being scolded as punishment for his own honesty? And was he truly meant to stay in the dark regarding the motives for his arrest or the identity of those behind it? His irritation grew, and he began pacing the room. Finding no one stood in his way, he pushed back his sleeves, felt his chest, and smoothed his hair. He approached the three men, declaring, "This is nonsense," which caused them to turn and move toward him with somber, heavy expressions.
Eventually, Kay came to a stop in front of the supervisor's desk again. "State Attorney Hasterer is a close friend of mine," he stated. "Am I permitted to call him?" "By all means," the supervisor replied, "though I fail to see what that would achieve, unless you have some personal matter to discuss with him."
"What would it achieve?" Kay cried out, feeling more bewildered than angry. "Who do you think you are? You're searching for a point in this while you're carrying out something as utterly pointless as it gets? It's enough to drive someone to tears. These men accost me, and then they loiter around here while I'm dragged before you. What point is there in calling a state attorney when I'm supposedly under arrest? Fine, I won't make the call." "You are free to call him if you wish," the supervisor said, gesturing toward the outer room where the telephone was located. "Please, go ahead and make your call."
"No, I've lost the desire," Kay said, turning toward the window. Across the street, the spectators were still there, and it was only when Kay approached the glass that they seemed to grow uncomfortable with their silent watching. The elderly couple made a move to get up, but the man behind them settled them down. "We seem to have an audience over there," Kay shouted to the supervisor, pointing his finger toward the street. "Go away!" he yelled at the people opposite. Immediately, the three of them stepped back. The old couple ended up behind the man, who shielded them with his broad frame and appeared to be muttering something incomprehensible into the air, based on the movement of his lips. They didn't leave completely, however. They seemed to be lingering, waiting for a chance to return to the window unnoticed. "Nosy, thoughtless people," Kay remarked, turning back to the room. He thought he saw a flicker of agreement in the supervisor's eyes from the corner of his own, but it was just as likely the man hadn't been listening at all. The supervisor had his hand pressed firmly against the table and seemed preoccupied with comparing the lengths of his fingers. The two policemen were perched on a chest draped in a colorful blanket, idly rubbing their knees. The three young men stood with their hands on their hips, looking around without any clear purpose. The entire scene was still, feeling like an office that had been abandoned and forgotten. "Now, gentlemen," Kay called out, feeling for a moment as if the weight of everyone in the room rested on his shoulders. "It appears your business with me has reached its end. In my view, it would be best to stop questioning whether your procedures are right or wrong and simply bring this to a peaceful conclusion with a handshake. If you agree, then please." He walked up to the supervisor's desk and extended his hand. The supervisor looked up, bit his lip, and stared at Kay's outstretched palm. Kay remained hopeful that the supervisor would accept his gesture. Instead, the man stood up, snatched a hard, circular hat from Miss Berstner's bed, and settled it carefully onto his head with both hands, as if testing the fit of a new purchase. "You think everything is so simple, don't you?" he remarked to Kay while adjusting the hat. "You believe we should just shake hands and end the matter? No, that simply won't do. On the other hand, I wouldn't want you to feel hopeless. Why should you? You are merely under arrest, nothing more. My task was to inform you of that fact. I have done so, and I have witnessed your reaction. That is sufficient for today. We can part ways now, at least for the moment. I assume you'll be heading to the bank?" "In that case," Kay said, stepping closer to the man, "being under arrest isn't so bad." "I never suggested it was anything else," the supervisor replied.
Then it hardly seems like it was necessary to notify me of the arrest at all, Kay countered, closing the distance even further. The others in the room gravitated toward them, forming a tight, cramped group by the exit. It was my duty, the supervisor stated. A foolish duty, Kay snapped, refusing to yield.
Perhaps, the supervisor conceded. But let's not waste more time talking. I assumed you would want to go to the bank. Since you are weighing my every word, I will add this. I am not compelling you to go. I simply thought you'd want to. To make things easier, and to ensure you arrive with as little trouble as possible, I have placed these 3 gentlemen, colleagues of yours, at your service.
What? Kay exclaimed, staring at the trio in shock. He remembered seeing them huddled by the photographs, but he now realized these pale, nondescript young men were indeed employees from his bank. Calling them colleagues was a stretch. They were subordinates, a detail the all-knowing supervisor had missed, but they were bank staff nonetheless. Kay was frustrated with himself. How had he been so preoccupied with the guards that he hadn't recognized them?
Rabensteiner, stiff-backed with swinging arms. Kulik, blonde with eyes set deep in his skull. Kaminer, afflicted with a chronic involuntary muscular twitch that looked like a permanent grin. "Good morning," Kay finally said, offering a hand as they bowed formally. "I didn't recognize you at all. Well, shall we head to work?" The 3 laughed and nodded with an eager energy, as if they had been waiting for this moment all morning. However, Kay realized he had left his hat in his bedroom. The 3 men immediately scrambled through the double doors to fetch it, creating a brief, clumsy scene. Kay watched them from the doorway. Rabensteiner, the most apathetic of the group, brought up the rear with nothing more than a dignified trot.
Kaminer reached the hat first. As he handed it over, Kay had to remind himself, as he often did at the office, that the man's grin was a physical tic, not a deliberate expression of amusement. At that moment, Mrs. Grubach opened the hallway door. She showed no sign of guilt or self-consciousness. Kay found himself glancing, as he often did, at the belt of her apron, which dug needlessly deep into her stout frame. Once outside, Kay checked his watch and decided to hail a taxi. He was already 30 minutes late and didn't want to lose any more time. Kaminer sprinted to the corner to find a cab. While they waited, Kulich tried to keep Kay distracted by pointing toward the house across the street.
The large man with the blonde goatee had appeared in the doorway there. Initially appearing embarrassed to be seen at his full height, the man stepped back and leaned against the wall. The elderly couple were likely still somewhere on the stairs. Kay was irritated that Kulich had pointed out the man, whom he had already noticed and expected to see. "Stop looking at him!" Kay barked, not even realizing how strange it was to speak to free men in such a commanding tone. No explanation was needed, however, as the taxi pulled up. They climbed in and set off. During the ride, Kay realized he hadn't even noticed the supervisor or the policeman leaving. The supervisor had distracted him with the bank staff, and the bank staff had distracted him from the supervisor's exit. It was a sign of his own lack of focus, and he resolved to be more observant in the future.
Despite this resolution, he found himself twisting around to peer through the rear window, hoping to catch a final glimpse of the authorities. Almost immediately, he turned back and settled comfortably into the corner of the seat, having made no real effort to see anyone. Though he didn't care to admit it, this was a moment where he could have used some support. But his companions were exhausted. Rabensteiner stared out the right window, Kulich out the left, and only Kaminer remained, his involuntary grin fixed on Kay. It would have been cruel to mock it. That spring, Kay typically spent his post-work hours. He generally stayed at the bank until 9, taking short walks, either alone or with colleagues. Afterward, he would frequent a pub to sit with a regular group of older men until 11. There were exceptions, of course. Occasionally, the bank's manager, whom Kay admired for his diligence and reliability, would invite him for a car ride or dinner at his grand residence. Additionally, once a week, Kay visited a girl named Elsa. She worked as a nightlife waitress until the early morning and only saw visitors during the day while she was still in bed.
On this particular evening, however, Kay wanted to go straight home. The day had moved quickly, filled with strenuous work and a steady stream of polite, friendly birthday wishes. Whenever he found a spare moment during the day, he felt a nagging sense that Mrs. Grubach's apartment had been thrown into total chaos by the morning's events. He felt it was his responsibility to set things right. He believed that once the physical order was restored, every trace of the morning would vanish and life would resume its normal course. He felt no threat from the 3 bank officials who had been present. They had returned to their ledgers as if nothing had happened. Throughout the day, Kay had summoned them to his office, sometimes individually, sometimes as a group, purely to scrutinize them. He always felt satisfied by their behavior and had been able to dismiss them without concern.
At 9:30, Kay arrived at his building. In the doorway stood a young man, legs braced apart, smoking a pipe. "Who are you?" Kay asked sharply, leaning in close to the boy's face in the dim light of the landing. "I'm the landlord's son, sir," the lad replied, removing the pipe from his mouth and stepping aside. "The landlord's son?" Kay repeated, impatiently tapping the floor with his walking stick. "Did you need something, sir? Should I get my father?" No, Kay said, his voice softening with a strange sense of forgiveness, as if the boy had committed a slight that Kay was choosing to overlook. "It's fine." He began to head up the stairs, but turned back to look at the boy once more before ascending. Though he could have gone straight to his room, Kay sought out Mrs. Grubach and knocked on her door. He found her at a table, surrounded by a pile of old stockings, and currently working on a knitted one. Kay offered an apology for the late hour, feeling a bit self-conscious, but Mrs. Grubach was warm and dismissed his excuses. He knew he was her favorite tenant. Kay surveyed the room and noted with relief that it looked exactly as it usually did. The morning's breakfast mess had been cleared away. A woman's hands can accomplish much in secret, he thought, realizing he might have smashed the dishes in a fit of frustration, but would never have been able to tidy them. "Why are you working so late?" he asked, sitting at the table and occasionally running his hands through the pile of stockings.
There is so much to do, she explained. During the day, I belong to the tenants. I only have the evenings to tend to my own affairs. I'm afraid I caused you some extra work today, Kay said. How so, Mr. Kay? She asked, setting her knitting in her lap with renewed interest. I mean the men who were here this morning. Oh, that, she said, returning calmly to her work. That was no real trouble, not especially. Kay watched her in silence. He sensed she was surprised he had brought it up, and perhaps even felt it was improper to discuss. This only made him feel it was more important to continue. He felt an old woman was the only person he could truly talk to about it. It must have been some work for you, Kay insisted. But it won't happen again. No, it can't happen again, she agreed, giving him a smile that seemed almost pained. Are you serious about that?
Yes, she said softly. But the main thing is that you mustn't take it too hard. There are so many terrible things in the world. Since you're being so open with me, Mr. K, I'll admit that I eavesdropped a bit from behind the door, and the two policemen told me a few things as well. Your happiness is very important to me, perhaps more than it should be for a landlady. From what I gathered, I can't say it's anything truly serious. No, you've been arrested, but not in the way a thief is arrested. A thief's arrest is bad, but this, it seems to me like something very complicated. Forgive me if I'm being silly. Something very complex that I don't understand, and something that you don't really need to understand anyway.
There is nothing foolish about your perspective, Mrs. Grubach. At least I am partially in agreement with you, Kay began. However, my own judgment of the situation is much more severe. I don't see it as a complex mystery, but rather a massive fuss over absolutely nothing. The reality is simply that I was caught off guard. Had I gotten up the moment I woke instead of letting myself be flustered by Anna's absence,
If I had simply ignored anyone in my path and come straight to you, perhaps having my breakfast in the kitchen for once and asking you to fetch my clothes from my room, in short, had I acted with common sense, nothing further would have happened. The whole ordeal would have been smothered before it could begin. People are so frequently caught unready.
He continued, contrasting his home life with his professional world. At the bank, for instance, I am always prepared. Something like this could never happen to me there. I have my own assistant, multiple telephones for internal and external calls right on my desk, and a constant stream of visitors, officials, and representatives. But more importantly, I am always immersed in my work, which keeps me alert. I would actually find it a pleasure to be faced with such a challenge in that environment. But it is over now, and I didn't truly want to discuss it further. I only wish to hear the opinion of a sensible woman like yourself. I'm glad to find we are of one mind. Now, you must give me your hand. An agreement like this should be sealed with a handshake.
Kay wondered if she would actually take his hand. The supervisor didn't, he recalled, watching her with a new, scrutinizing intensity. She stood up as he did, appearing somewhat self-conscious. It was clear she hadn't fully grasped the logic of his speech. In her confusion, she blurted out something entirely unintended and inappropriate for the moment. "Don't take it so hard, Mr. K," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. In her emotion, she completely forgot the handshake. "I wasn't aware I was taking it hard," Kay replied. He felt a sudden wave of exhaustion, realizing that if this woman's agreement was based on pity rather than understanding, it was worth very little. Before heading to the door, Kay inquired, "Is Miss Bursner in?"
"No," Mrs. Grubach replied, finally offering a straightforward piece of information, with a smile. "She's at the theater. Did you want to see her? I can leave a message." I just wanted to speak with her for a moment. I'm not sure when she'll return. She usually stays out late when she goes to the theater." "It doesn't matter," Kay said, his head low as he turned to leave. "I simply wanted to apologize for occupying her room today." "There's really no need, Mr. K. You are far too considerate. The young lady knows nothing about it. She hasn't been home since early this morning, and everything has been put back in its place. See for yourself." She opened the door to Miss Bursner's room.
"Thank you. I'll take your word for it," Kay said, though he couldn't resist stepping toward the open door. Moonlight spilled quietly into the dark room. From what he could see, everything was indeed back where it belonged. Even the white blouse was no longer on the window handle. The pillows on the bed looked strikingly full as they sat in the pale light. "Miss Bursner is often out late," Kay remarked, looking at Mrs. Grubach as if she were somehow at fault for the girl's schedule. "That's just the way young people are," Mrs. Grubach said defensively. True, Kay conceded, but it can be taken to extremes." "Yes, it certainly can," Mrs. Grubach agreed. "You are quite right, Mr. K. Perhaps that is the case here. I don't wish to be unkind about Miss Bursner. She is a sweet, tidy, and hard-working girl, but she really ought to have more pride. She's a bit too forthcoming. Twice this month already I've seen her on the street with a different man. I hate to say it, and I've told no one but you, but I'm going to have a word with her. There are other things concerning her that worry me as well." Kay was suddenly gripped by a flash of anger he could barely mask. "Mrs. Grubach, you are completely mistaken," he snapped. "You've entirely misunderstood what I meant regarding Miss Bursner. In fact, I strongly advise you not to say a word to her. You are wrong about her. I know her well, and there is no truth in your gossip. Furthermore, though perhaps I'm overstepping, I don't wish to stand in your way. Say whatever you like to her. Good night." "Mr. K," Mrs. Grubach pleaded, rushing toward his door as he swung it open. "I don't want to speak to her yet. I'll keep an eye on things, of course, but you're the only one I've shared this with. A landlady has to keep a decent house, after all." "Decent?" Kay yelled through the narrowing gap of the door. "If you want to keep a decent house, you'll have to start by giving me my notice." He slammed the door shut.
A faint, tentative knocking followed, but Kay ignored it entirely. He stayed by the window, pressing his palms against his weary eyes, hoping for a chance to learn exactly when Miss Berstner would return. For a brief moment, he entertained a spiteful thought. He would punish Mrs. Grubach by convincing Miss Berstner to join him in handing in their notices simultaneously. However, he quickly dismissed the idea as shockingly extreme. Worse, it might suggest he was fleeing because of the morning's strange events, a thought he found entirely nonsensical, pointless, and beneath him.
When he grew tired of staring at the deserted street, he cracked his door open just enough to see anyone entering the flat. He settled onto the couch and smoked a cigar in the quiet, holding out until nearly 11 o'clock. Unable to remain still any longer, he stepped into the hallway, pacing as if his presence there could somehow hasten her arrival. He didn't feel any particular longing for her. In fact, he could barely recall her features, but he was determined to speak with her. It galled him that her late return was extending the day's atmosphere of disorder and agitation right to its end. He even blamed her for the fact that he hadn't eaten dinner or visited Elsa, the waitress, as he had planned. He told himself he could still manage both after he finished his business with Miss Berstner.
It was past 11:30 when footsteps echoed on the stairs. Kay, who had been pacing the hall as boldly as if it were his own private room, suddenly lost his nerve and retreated behind his door. Miss Berstner had arrived. She seemed to shiver, pulling a silk shawl over her slim shoulders as she turned the key in the lock. Kay realized she would head straight for her room, and he couldn't very well barge in there in the dead of night. He had to act now. However, he hadn't turned on his own light. Stepping out from the pitch-black room might look like an ambush and would surely terrify her. In his desperation, he whispered through the door's opening, "Miss Berstner."
"Is someone there?" she asked, her eyes wide as she scanned the dim hallway. "It is I," Kay said, stepping into view. "Oh, Mr. Kay," she said with a smile, extending her hand. "Good evening. I was hoping for a word with you, if you'd permit it." "Now?" she asked, a bit taken aback. "Does it truly have to be right now? It's a bit unusual, isn't it?" "I have been waiting for you since 9 o'clock." "Well, I was at the theater," she replied. "I had no idea you were waiting." "The matter only arose today," Kay explained. "I see. Well, I suppose it's fine. Though I'm so exhausted I could collapse. Come into my room for a moment. We can't stay out here. We'll wake the whole house, which would be far more awkward for us than for them. Wait here until I've lit my lamp. Then please switch off the hallway light." Kay followed her instructions, waiting until she stepped back out to quietly usher him in. "Have a seat," she said, pointing toward the ottoman.
Despite her claims of fatigue, she remained standing, leaning against her bedpost. She didn't even remove her hat, a small piece adorned with a profusion of flowers. "What was it you wanted?" she asked, her curiosity evident as she gently crossed her legs. "I'm quite interested to know." "I expect you'll say," Kay started, "that this isn't exactly urgent and could wait until morning, but—" "I never have much patience for introductions," Miss Berstner interrupted. "Well, that certainly makes my task simpler," Kay replied. "This morning, partly due to my own situation, your room was left in a bit of a state. It was caused by people I don't know, and it happened against my will, but since it was centered around me, I wanted to offer my apologies."
"My room?" Miss Berstner asked. Instead of looking around to check for damage, she kept her eyes fixed on Kay, scrutinizing him. "It's true," Kay said. For the first time, they locked eyes. "There's probably no use in explaining the exact details of how it happened." "But the details are the most interesting part," she countered. "No," Kay insisted. "Very well then," she said. "I won't try to pry into your secrets. If you say it's uninteresting, I'll take your word for it. I'm happy to forgive you.
especially since I can't actually see anything out of order. She began a slow circuit of the room, her hand resting flat on her hip. She stopped abruptly at the mat where her photographs were displayed. "Look at this," she cried out. "My photographs have been moved. Oh, that's dreadful. Someone really was in here without my permission." Kay nodded, silently cursing Kamener, a man from his bank who was perpetually busy with useless, meddlesome tasks. "It's quite strange," Miss Bursner continued, "that I have to forbid you from doing something you should have had the sense to forbid yourself, namely entering my room while I'm away.